Bodie, once a vibrant gold mining town in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, saw its heyday in the late 1800s. Founded in 1859, it rapidly grew to a bustling town of over 10,000 people by the 1870s, complete with saloons, brothels, and a rowdy, lawless atmosphere. But, as gold became scarce and the economy collapsed, the town was quickly abandoned. By the 1940s, it was little more than a ghost town. Yet, despite the exodus, something eerie lingered in the air, and it is now considered one of the most ghostly places in the United States. According to local legend, the residents who once lived there never truly left. Witnesses report strange sightings, whispers on the wind, and feelings of being watched, incidents that make visitors question if Bodie is really empty or if the spirits of its past still walk its decaying streets. It was late October 1982. The rain was pouring down in sheets, and the wind howled through the cracks of the old wooden buildings. The fog clung to the ground, turning the scene into something out of a nightmare. The only sounds that broke the silence were the occasional creaks of the abandoned structures and the distant rumble of thunder. It was one of those nights when you could almost hear the past calling out from the darkness. I had heard about Bodie for years, a place so haunted. It seemed as if time itself had stopped there. The locals swore that Bodie was different, that it wasn't just a town that had died. It was a place where the dead had refused to leave. But I had always dismissed it as nothing more than ghost stories. That night, I wasn't so sure. I wandered the streets, my flashlight cutting through the thick fog. The buildings were all in various states of decay, with windows shattered, doors hanging off their hinges, and rusted relics of a once thriving community scattered around. I stopped in front of an old saloon, its door slightly ajar. Something about it made my heart race. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped instantly. The air felt thick, heavy, almost like I was being smothered. I shivered despite the warmth of my jacket, and for a moment, I almost turned back. But curiosity got the better of me. The room was eerily still, save for the sound of my boots tapping on the wooden floor. The old bar stood to my left, its bottles long emptied and broken. But as I approached, I caught something odd, an impression in the dust, as if someone had just recently been there. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and whiskey, like a memory that hadn't quite faded. Then I saw it, the faint outline of a figure in the corner of the room, standing just outside the light from my flashlight. A man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face obscured by shadows. My breath caught in my throat, and my hand shook as I lifted the light to get a better look. But the figure was gone, vanishing like mist in the wind. I froze, unsure of whether I had seen something real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. As I stood there, trying to steady my breathing, the air around me seemed to change. It was as if the temperature had dropped even further, and the room suddenly felt crowded, filled with invisible presences. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I left the saloon quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the fog lingered, and the town seemed even more ominous. As I walked down the street, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. Each step I took echoed in the silence, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure again. When I finally reached the edge of town, I glanced back one last time. For a split second, I thought I saw a shadow move in one of the windows of a nearby house. But when I turned to look more closely, there was nothing there. A month later, I didn't think much about Bodie after I left that night. It was just another ghost story, another unsettling experience to add to the list of strange encounters. But a month later, while browsing an antique store in San Francisco, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. On a dusty shelf sat an old photograph of Bodie, taken in the late 1800s. The picture was in sepia tones, capturing a group of men standing outside a saloon. One of them was the same man I had seen in the saloon that night. The same clothes, the same haunting expression. My heart raced as I picked it up, and the shopkeeper noticed my reaction. "Ah, this old photo," she said with a smile. "That's a rare one. People say it's cursed. Folks around here swear that anyone who touches it, well, they get a little too curious about Bodie." I didn't know what to believe. Was it a coincidence? Could I have imagined it all? I had no answers, but that photograph, with the shadowy figure staring back at me, made me wonder. Did I truly leave Bodie behind? Or had he followed me home? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The photograph of Bodie, the one that showed the man I had seen in the saloon, lingered in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I kept thinking about the way he had stood in the corner, his eyes hidden in the shadows. Was he trying to tell me something? Or was I just imagining it all? That night, as I lay in bed, I thought I heard a faint knocking on my window. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but the knocks grew more insistent. Slow, deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. I got up and opened the blinds, but there was nothing outside, just the dark, empty street. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air seemed heavier, thicker than it should have been for a calm night in the city. I tried to forget about it, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then, something happened that made me question everything. The following week, I returned to the antique shop. I don't know why I wasn't particularly interested in buying anything, but the pull to revisit that photograph, to understand it, was overwhelming. When I arrived, I was greeted by the same shopkeeper, who didn't seem at all surprised to see me. "Back again," she said, her voice soft but knowing. "I had a feeling you'd return." I nodded, trying to mask my unease. I can't stop thinking about that photograph. The man in it. He looks like the one I saw in Bodie." She paused, studying me intently. There was something almost too knowing about her gaze. "Sometimes," she said, her voice lowering as if sharing a secret, "objects, places, some things carry more than just memories. They carry pieces of the past, of souls, of unfinished stories. The photograph you found is not just a photo. It's a record of a soul that hasn't moved on. And you," she hesitated, then spoke in a whisper, "you've been marked." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Marked? What do you mean?" Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "The man you saw in Bodie. His name was Elias Thorne. He was one of the original residents, a miner who died under mysterious circumstances. They say his spirit, along with the others who perished in Bodie, lingers in that town. But Elias, he has unfinished business. He was obsessed with something or someone, and now that you've seen him, he won't let you forget." I felt a shiver run down my back. "Unfinished business? What do you mean by that?" She seemed reluctant to answer, glancing around the shop as if making sure no one else was listening. Then, with a sigh, she motioned for me to follow her to the back room. "There's something you need to see," she said. We entered a small, dimly lit room in the back of the shop. It was filled with oddities, old furniture, antique mirrors, trinkets, and strange artifacts. But what caught my attention was a table in the center of the room, covered with yellowing papers and old maps. One of the maps was of Bodie, marked with several locations circled in red ink. At the center of it all was an old journal, its pages worn and brittle. She handed it to me with trembling hands. "This was Elias Thorne's journal," she explained. "He was an obsessed man, a man who believed the town was cursed. He was looking for something in Bodie, something hidden deep within the mines, something that was never meant to be found. But before he could uncover it, he died under mysterious circumstances. Some say he was murdered. Others believe he was taken by the very thing he sought." I flipped through the journal, my hands shaking. The pages were filled with strange symbols, cryptic notes, and sketches of tunnels beneath the town. It seemed like Elias had been searching for something in the mines, a treasure, an artifact, or perhaps a secret so dark that it threatened to consume him. As I flipped through the pages, one line stood out, written in Elias's scrawl: "The spirits guard what lies beneath. If the curse is not broken, it will rise again." Suddenly, I felt a cold breath against the back of my neck. I froze. My heart pounded. I knew no one was standing behind me, yet the sensation was unmistakable. It was as though Elias's spirit was standing there, watching me, urging me to uncover the truth. I dropped the journal, stumbling backward as I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "It's too late. You've already seen too much. I spun around, but no one was there. The shopkeeper was gone, and the room had grown darker, colder. The walls seemed to close in on me. The door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I desperately tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then the knocking came again. The same slow, deliberate knock that I had heard before, only this time, it wasn't coming from outside the shop. It was coming from beneath my feet. The floorboards groaned under the pressure, and the ground seemed to tremble. A low growl echoed through the walls, a sound that was neither animal nor human. My hands trembled as I placed them on the floor, trying to find the source of the noise. And then, through a crack in the wood, I saw it, something moving beneath the earth, something ancient, something restless. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. A shadow stretched up from the crack in the floor, and for a moment, I thought I saw Elias Thorne's face twisted in agony, his eyes wide with desperation. He reached out to me, his hands skeletal, grasping for something or someone. "Get out of here!" A voice suddenly screamed from the doorway, shattering the moment. The shopkeeper was back, her face pale with fear. "You have to leave now. The curse is coming for you." I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the door, and as it swung open, the full force of the cold wind slammed into me. I didn't look back as I ran into the night, the echoes of the knocking still ringing in my ears. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elias Thorne's face, his hollow eyes, his skeletal hand reaching for me, his voice calling from the depths of Bodie. I tried to shake it off, convinced that it was just the stress and fear from that night. But the truth was, no matter how far I ran from Bodie, the town followed me. The feeling of being watched, the oppressive weight of something ancient lurking just beyond my vision, it never left. I tried to forget the journal, the strange symbols, the whispers. I told myself it was all just a series of coincidences. But then I received a package. No return address, just my name scribbled on the front. Inside was a faded photograph. My stomach dropped when I saw it. It was a photo of the saloon in Bodie, the very same one I had visited, but this time it was different. The building was intact, the windows glowing with warm light as if the town was alive again. And standing in the doorway was Elias Thorne, staring directly at the camera. His eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't place, something like recognition, mixed with something darker, more desperate. There was no note, no explanation, just the photograph. I threw it down, but I couldn't stop staring at it. I had no idea how it had gotten to me, but it didn't feel like a coincidence. Felt like a warning. That night, October 31st, 1982, I couldn't keep away. I needed to know the truth. Was Elias Thorne's curse real? Was there something in Bodie that had been waiting to be uncovered? I packed my car and drove through the night, hoping to find answers, hoping to finally close the chapter. But the closer I got to Bodie, the colder the air became. The headlights of my car barely cut through the fog that had rolled in like an impenetrable wall. I reached the entrance to the ghost town at dawn. The place was as desolate as ever, empty, silent, and shrouded in mist. But there was something different about it today. The wind seemed to whisper, like voices carried on the breeze, and I felt the weight of the town pressing down on me. I had always been a skeptic, but now I wasn't so sure. Something in my gut told me that the curse of Bodie wasn't just a story, it was something real. And I was about to find out just how real. I wandered the town, retracing the steps I had taken during my first visit. But this time, the air was heavier. The silence was unnerving. The only sounds were the creaks of the old buildings and the occasional rustle of leaves. I tried to focus, tried to ignore the chill creeping up my spine, but it was impossible. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected to see Elias's shadow, moving just out of sight. I stopped in front of the saloon again, drawn to it as if something in the air was telling me to go inside. The door creaked open of its own accord, and the temperature inside dropped instantly. The floorboards groaned under my feet as I stepped into the room, the same room where I had seen him before. But now the place was different. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco, and I could almost hear the clinking of glasses, the faint chatter of voices that weren't mine. And then I heard it, the soft, familiar knock, slow and deliberate, coming from behind the bar. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was the same knock I'd heard before in the antique shop, in the night, and even in my dreams. I walked cautiously toward the bar, my breath shallow. The knock came again, louder this time, as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the wood of the bar. The knocking stopped. The room fell silent. But then I heard it, a whisper, soft and muffled, coming from behind the bar. "You shouldn't have come back." I jerked back, the voice unmistakable. Elias Thorne. I could feel his presence in the room, as if he was standing right next to me, his breath cold against my skin. I turned toward the door, ready to leave, but something stopped me. A sound of scraping, like something being dragged across the floor, came from the corner of the room. My heart skipped a beat. I slowly turned around, my breath caught in my throat. In the dim light I saw it, a figure, crouched in the far corner of the saloon, moving slowly, dragging something heavy behind it. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze. And it was staring directly at me. I didn't move. My body was frozen in place, unable to take my eyes off the figure. Then, it stood up slowly, deliberately, and began to walk toward me. The scraping sound grew louder, and I realized that whatever it was dragging, it was heavy, too heavy. The figure's body seemed to shift unnaturally, like it was no longer human, as though it had become something otherworldly. Couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out of there, but my feet were rooted to the ground. Then, Elias's voice cut through the air. "It's too late. The curse is already upon you." I stumbled back, finally breaking free from the paralysis that had gripped me. I turned and ran, my legs pumping faster than they ever had before. As I burst out the door, I heard the scrape of feet behind me, growing louder and closer. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The fog seemed to chase me, wrapping around the car like a suffocating blanket. I peeled out of Bodie, my heart still racing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. A week later, November 7th, 1982. It's been a week since I left Bodie, but I still can't escape the feeling that the town is closing in on me. The strange occurrences have only intensified. At night, I hear knocks on my door, slow and deliberate. When I open it, there's no one there. And every time I look in the mirror, I swear I see a figure, Elias Thorne, standing just behind me. I've started researching him again, trying to piece together his story, trying to find some explanation for everything. But the more I learn, the less I understand. It's as if Bodie is pulling me back, and the more I try to distance myself, the closer it comes. I don't know if I'll ever escape this, but I know one thing for sure: whatever Elias was looking for in those mines, it's still down there, and it's calling for me. A week later, November 14th, 1982, I couldn't stop the feeling that I was being pulled back to Bodie. Every night, it haunted my dreams: endless shadows, whispers in the dark, the scraping sound, and Elias Thorne's voice calling my name. I tried to resist, tried to live my life as though nothing had happened. But there was no escaping it. The curse wasn't just tied to the town. It was tied to me now. I felt it in my bones, like a shadow I could never outrun. I started to see things more than I had before. At work, I'd catch glimpses of figures in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing. The knocking was constant now, echoing through the walls of my apartment, through the floorboards, as if it were coming from the very foundation of the building. My reflection in the mirror became a stranger sometimes. Elias's face seemed to overlap mine, his eyes glaring, desperate, and twisted in agony. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to return. I needed to know the truth about what had happened in Bodie, what Elias had found, and why his spirit couldn't rest. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was an obsession, a compulsion that I couldn't ignore. That night, November 18th, 1982, I drove back to Bodie. This time, I didn't feel the sense of dread that had plagued me before. Instead, there was a strange calm. The fog had returned, thick as ever, but I felt oddly drawn to it, as though it were guiding me. As I drove past the abandoned town, the buildings seemed to lean in toward me, their broken windows like hollow eyes staring into my soul. I parked my car near the entrance, the headlights illuminating the silhouette of the saloon. Everything felt off. The wind had died down, and there was an unnatural stillness in the air. It was as though the whole town was holding its breath. I made my way to the saloon, my footsteps muffled by the heavy fog. As I approached, I felt it an intense pressure, like the air itself was thicker, laden with something old, something ancient. The door creaked open on its own, and I stepped inside. The saloon was exactly as I remembered it, except now, it felt alive. The low murmur of voices reached my ears, and I saw shadows moving in the corners of the room. But there was no one there, just the remnants of a long-gone past. Suddenly, I heard the scraping sound again. It came from the far corner of the room, where the bar was. And then, Elias's voice whispered through the air, as cold as ice. "You came back. You shouldn't have come back." My heart raced as I turned toward the sound. There, in the corner of the room, the figure stood Elias Thorne. His form was translucent, flickering in and out of focus like a fading memory. His face was gaunt, twisted with pain, his eyes hollow. His hand reached out, fingers stretching toward me, but he didn't move. You never left," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What happened to you? What are you trying to tell me?" His lips parted, and a rasping breath escaped. "The mine," he breathed. "The secret of Bodie, it's hidden below. I sought it. I found it. And now it wants you." Before I could respond, I heard a distant rumble deep, reverberating through the earth. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and the air grew colder still. I could hear the sound of chains rattling, as if something was shifting beneath the town, stirring from its ancient slumber. Elias's image flickered violently, his face contorted in fear and fury. "You must stop it," he pleaded, his voice shaking with desperation. "It's too late for me, but you still have a chance. Find the heart of the mine. Destroy it. Destroy what I couldn't." The shadows around Elias thickened, swirling like smoke, and I felt a sudden pull toward the door. I didn't know how, but I knew what I had to do. The mine. The heart of the mine. The thing Elias had been searching for, the thing that had consumed him. The mine, November 19th, 1982. I found the entrance to the mine just outside of town. The darkness seemed to swallow everything as I descended deeper into the earth, the narrow passage winding and twisting like the bowels of some great beast. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, but there was something else, something suffocating, an oppressive presence that seemed to grow heavier the deeper I went. I could hear the sound of movement in the walls, the scraping, the rattling of chains. I wasn't alone. As I ventured further into the mine, I came across a small chamber, the walls lined with strange carvings and symbols. At the center of the room was a pedestal, and on it an object. It was ancient, covered in dust and dirt, but as soon as I laid eyes on it, I felt the room grow colder. My breath came out in visible puffs. The object was a small, stone relic, its surface etched with more symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. The moment I touched it, the ground shook violently. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the mine, and the walls began to crack. Something old and powerful was waking up. I knew what I had to do. The journal had mentioned it, the curse, the darkness that lived beneath Bodie. Elias had tried to find it, tried to control it, but he had failed. Now it was up to me to finish what he had started. I raised the stone relic above my head and smashed it against the floor. The moment it shattered, a deafening roar filled the mine, and the world around me seemed to implode. The walls cracked wide open, and the air became thick with smoke and ash. I stumbled backward, nearly choking on the dust. The ground shook so violently that I lost my balance and fell to the floor. Through the swirling chaos, I saw it, an enormous figure, dark and formless, rising from the depths of the earth. It was alive, or at least it once had been. And it was angry. It reached toward me, its massive, clawed hands sweeping through the air. I could feel the weight of its presence, the suffocating cold, the hunger that pulsed from it. I closed my eyes, knowing that there was no escape. The curse of Bodie was not just a legend, it was a living, breathing entity. And I had awakened it. The end? Or the beginning? When they found my car outside the mine the next morning, it was abandoned, no sign of struggle, no trace of where I had gone. Only the faint, lingering smell of smoke and something ancient. No one knows what happened to me. Some say I was taken by the curse, others that I left Bodie behind for good. But every now and then, someone claims to hear the faint sound of knocking, slow and deliberate, coming from the abandoned saloon. And sometimes, in the fog, if you look closely, you might just see a figure standing at the door watching you. Some things never truly leave. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.